Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome everybody, Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today to do this thing we call Hands-On Apologetics, where we learn how to explain, defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. Got a fantastic show in store for you today because, I love shows like this because the topic is very practical, and that's why the program's called Hands-On Apologetics, because we learn the hands-on deal about explaining, defending the faith. We learn a lot of content, but also practical things are so important. And so as you know, throughout this whole COVID crisis, I've been calling on you to do apologetics in place, and many people are stationed in place. So why not share, explain the faith? And many of you have, and our audience has grown, and thank you so much for doing that. And I also want to encourage everybody to continue to do that. Let people know about Hands-On Apologetics. Subscribe, like, do all the social media stuff, and actually, engage with people. Use reason, logic, philosophy, scripture, to show the beauty and the truth about Christ and his church. But before you do that, you need to be armed, right? You can't just rush into circumstances unarmed and not ready. So that's what we do here at Hands-On Apologetics, is I try to build that skill set so that everybody can competently defend the faith, right? Well, today we're going to have our very good friend Pat Flynn come on the show. And he's going to talk about 7 fallacies to know when debating online. So this is right up our alley with apologetics in place. I know many of you have participated in religious forums. Maybe you're sending emails back and forth with loved ones or friends or colleagues talking about things about the faith. Well, this is a very important program for you because we're going to go over the key fallacies, informal fallacies, to know, so that you can sharpen your own arguments, you don't fall into these problems, and also you can discover when they're being used against you. So Pat Flynn's going to be coming up on the other side of the break. We're going to talk about those 7 fallacies you need to know when you engage on debating online. And by the way, finding the fallacy officially for today is called the Courtiers Fallacy, and we also are going to meet an early church father who is Pope St. Celestine I. But before we begin, folks, let me give my shout-out, my hat tip, my yoo-hoo to all you watching a live stream on Facebook, YouTube, and all the other platforms out there. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. I also want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country and also via podcast around the world through our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And that's really one-stop shopping, folks. If you want to access our shows here on Hands-On Apologetics or any of the other shows that we produce, go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org, click on our shows, scroll down to whatever program you'd like, and bam, you have access to the shows where you could do all sorts of fun stuff. You could download, you could share, you could do all sorts of things, and, engage in this thing we call apologetics and evangelism. Also, if you have a question for Pat, you can give us a call toll-free at 888-526-2151. It's 888-526-2151. Or you can always email us your questions at the Dojo mailbox, which is questions@handsonapologetics.com. And we will be more than glad to reply to you. In fact, I do reply. Not always timely, but I do reply. That's the way to get hold of me, folks. I do have 2 websites, by the way, handsonapologetics.com and GaryMichuta.com. But really, this is the way you get a hold of me. because that is the direct line to the sensei. So let's see. We took care of the phone number. We did all our housekeeping chores. Can't think of anything else we're missing. I don't see anything on the forum. So why don't we jump into our Finding the Fallacy today, shall we? Like I said, today's Finding the Fallacy is called the Courtiers Reply. And this is actually, I found on the web a fallacy that's hotly debated, whether or not it is a fallacy. What exactly is the fallacy? How do you respond? So there's lots of different opinions as to what exactly is the Courtiers Reply and whether or not it really is a fallacy. You ask, what is it? Well, it was coined by the American biologist P.Z. Myers, in which a respondent to criticism claimed that the critic lacks sufficient knowledge, credentials, or training to pose any sort of criticism whatsoever. I think that's probably a good definition of it. In other words, it's a way, and you can see why it's not a fallacy. It's not a deformed argument as much as it's just a plain old shutdown. It's holding the hand up and basically just saying, you're not allowed to give any kind of criticism. Why? Well, because you don't have the proper degrees, you haven't researched, you haven't trained in the field, and therefore you're not entitled to pose arguments or criticisms. Now, in fact, the title, The Courtier's Reply, comes from that old fable about the emperor's new clothes. And when the child pointed out that the emperor is actually naked, the courtiers replied to him that he didn't study all the finities of royal clothing and clothing theory and stuff like that. So that's where the title comes from. There's some, and you can see where this could be true, and it can also maybe be abused. You don't need to have a doctorate in a particular field in order to raise objections, because really what counts is evidence and arguments, folks, not whether you have lots of degrees. Now, of course, if you're credentialed and you're trained in the area, that should suggest that you have the proper skills to make a solid argument, and there is a kind of deference you can give to experts in the field. But that doesn't give the right to say that non-experts can't raise valid points. And I think that's really what's at the root of the Courtier's Reply. We should also recognize, too, that it's important for us apologists, for us Catholics especially, to exercise humility. And humility isn't denigrating something that's good. We often think of humility in a Christian sense as that you're actually very good, or you possess something that's good, and you kind of denigrate it, self-denigration. That's not humility. Humility is really just the accurate assessment of what you are and what you're not, right? And I think that's very important, because if you don't have humility, you could run into problems. In other words, yes, you may not be credentialed, you might not have sufficient knowledge in a particular field, and you might have some valid points, but you should also be humble and realize that because you haven't studied a certain area, that you do lack a certain amount of expertise. You could be missing evidence or ideas or concepts or principles that you are totally unaware of. So, understand the Courtier's Reply, that just because you're not particularly lettered in a certain way or have a certain skill set, that does not mean that you cannot criticize or raise objections. On the other hand, too, in humility, we ought to recognize what we know and what we don't know, and realize that although we could raise objections, that there may be things out there that we're not aware of. So I just wanted to point that out. Like I said, it is kind of it's one of those fallacies that's still back and forth and somewhat a little controversial. So that's our Finding the Fallacy for today, the Courtier's Reply. Let's jump to meet the early church father for today. This early church father is Pope Celestine I, who is a saint. He reigned from AD 422 to 432. And as always, we use Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers for our segments, and Jurgens has a short entry for him. It says Pope Celestine is of no small importance for his dealing with the Eastern Patriarchs, especially in regards to Nestorius and the Council of Ephesus, which met in 431 AD, except for a fragment of a sermon that appears in the corpus of his letters, which was letter 10. His letters are the only surviving writings from this pontiff. His pontificate is dated from September 422 AD to his death in July 430 AD. And we have a little clip of from Pope St. Celestine I. And let's see, this is a letter that he gave to his legates at the Council of Ephesus on May 8th, 431. And the official Latin title, by the way, is Cum Deo Nostro. And he says this, quote, "We enjoy upon you the necessary task of guarding the authority of the Apostolic See. And if the instructions handed to you have to mention this, and if you have the present in the assembly, if it comes to controversy, it is not yours to join in the fight, but the judge of their opinions." Now, this short letter to the legates at Ephesus, I can't go into all the background. So what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to refer you to a previous program that we did with our good friend Eric Ibarra, where Eric was talking about the Council of Ephesus and actually mentions Pope Celestine and this letter. In other words, that it's very clear that the Pope and the fathers at Ephesus understood that there was a special authority that resides in the Apostolic See of Rome. And so it's a very important proof text for papal supremacy. And coming up next, after the break, we're going to be talking with Master Apologist Pat Flynn about 7 fallacies you need to know before you debate online. Stay tuned.
Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light to my path." According to St. John Paul II, being a Christian means saying yes to Jesus Christ. It consists in surrendering to the Word of God and relying on it, but also endeavoring to know better and better the profound meaning of this Word. May God grant that we always rely on His Word, read it often, and put it into practice.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. And talk about hands-on apologetics. I know many of you are engaging in debating online, and it's important to go prepared. Don't just wing it. Don't shoot from your hip. You need to know the facts. You know how to present the facts, and think critically about what's being argued and how you argue. And to help facilitate this, we have our good friend, master apologist, Pat Flynn, coming on the show. Pat Flynn, of course, is the host of the Pat Flynn Show, which covers everything from fitness to mental health to business to writing to philosophy and theology. You get the tools that you need to become someone who outperforms, outsmarts, outmaneuvers the pack. And, he's a best-selling author. He's a philosopher, fitness coach, musician, entrepreneur, and just all-around great guy. And Pat Flynn, welcome back to Hands-On Apologetics.
Gary, it's always a pleasure to be here. And as soon as I need a new PR agent, you are right at the top of the running. I can do nothing but blush every time I come on your show. Thank you for such a kind welcome.
Oh, well, it's well-deserved, my friend, because you do outstanding work in so many different fields, too. That's what's amazing to me. Is you are a generalist in not only in theory but also in practice.
Yeah, I certainly try to be. It was the theme of my latest book, humbly titled How to Be Better at Almost Everything. Little green book, but I explore the benefits and the approach of becoming a generalist. That depth is good. We want depth. We do want mastery. But not at the exclusion of other skills, of other hobbies, of other interests. And that breadth of skill is often just as important as depth, especially in our modern culture, and particularly if you're interested in being an entrepreneur, because then you'll have the ability to combine different talents, different perspectives, different skills that will enable you to be different. And I've often found that it's easier to stand out when you're different than it is to just be better at any one particular thing. So that's an approach I've tried to take for a while now.
Yeah, that's a great insight, because boy, it is so tempting to drill down on the few things that you do well, and put all your eggs in that one basket. But that ultimately is not as good as having a broad selection of things that you may not be an expert on, but you also do well.
I think that's right. And there's the other mistake people can fall into, which is the idea of the jack of all trades, master of none. And I argue against that in the book as well, as we do want mastery and we do want a good amount of depth, at least in some areas. And then it's a matter of trying to decide, well, what other skills do I need to really make a difference or to make an impact? And just to give a quick example, a lot of my business is in the fitness industry, and I am not a hardcore fitness specialist. I've never won any bodybuilding competitions or powerlifting meets or any of that. But when I've been able to combine that with my backgrounds in writing and philosophy, I've been able to stand out in a way that many people in the fitness industry haven't. I think because of my communication skills. I've been able to articulate things and to coach things. And it's that combination of skills that has given me a very clear competitive advantage, even over people who are bigger, stronger, or faster than I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that applies to apologetics too, because you can say, well, I'm not a scripture expert like Scott Hahn or Brant Petrie or John Bergsma, or I'm not a historian, like Steve Weidenkopf or something like. So somebody might say, well, then, I'm just not a good apologist. But actually, you could know logic, you could be articulate, you could know something about history, and combine those skills to stand out in the field.
And that's where logic is an important, I call it a meta skill in my book, because it kind of makes you a shock-proof BS detector. That's a line from Hemingway. And logic can be powerful because it can help you to attain truth, and that's awesome. It's useful for democracy. There's many reasons to study logic, but it can even help you when you're looking at arguments where you might not be a relevant specialist, whatever that field may be, because you might not be able to evaluate the truth of the various premises. But if you're trained in logic, you can still evaluate the structure of the argument. Say, like, even if that's true, that conclusion wouldn't follow. Right. And that's kind of an exercise I like to give people. It's like, go read some technical literature on something you know nothing about and see if you can just pick out any fallacies, even if this is outside your realm of expertise. Now, that conclusion may still be true. You're just trying to show that it wouldn't follow from the argument. So, but let's take another example. Maybe you're studying something, you're hearing an argument from somebody where you're not a trained expert, but their logic is valid and a conclusion does follow. Well, then what do? Well, now you need to either get another expert to help you evaluate the premises, or you have to roll up your sleeves and do the work and try and evaluate them yourself. But either way, having some training in logic is going to be helpful.
Yeah, at least it narrows it down, so you could look at know it's a problem probably in one of the premises, or, or the conclusion doesn't follow.
Right. Yeah. And it's just a good thing to do in general because, we're rational animals. We're oriented towards truth. And logic is that it's really the study of the structure of thought. That's what logic is. And most people are intuitively logical. Some people more intuitively than others. It's like music. Some people are just really naturally gifted as being musicians. But most musicians understand that even if you're gifted at it, it's still worth studying music theory. It's still worth studying the structure because that helps you work through some of the harder problems. And even if you're naturally gifted at, logical thinking, there's going to be cases where it's not so clear. And that's where having some formal understanding and training is going to be helpful.
Yeah. And not only to detect, problems in thinking of your opponents, but I found that, being sharp in, just the basics of logic, it helps you prevent yourself from engaging in fallacious arguments, Yeah. And it's just so important.
It's so helpful for that because logic teaches you when to keep your mouth shut, which is hugely important, especially in today's environment when people are so quick to issue opinions. Because you'll quickly hopefully realize that, I don't really have an argument for this, not right now anyway. So maybe I shouldn't just wade into this debate just for the sake of wading into debate. Maybe I should try and do some research. Maybe I should learn about this more. It's a protective mechanism from both directions. One, protecting yourself from being argued against or being attacked online, but also making sure that you don't rush into making yourself appear foolishly either. Right. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's a foolish protector, I guess you could say. But which brings us, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say is before we get into the specific fallacies, it might be worth just kind of doing like a quick crash course on just some of the fundamentals of logic. But I didn't mean to interrupt. So you push this conversation where you were thinking of. Oh no.
Yeah. I was trying to come up with a quip, but it wasn't that good. So I'm glad that you're going to do something different.
Oh, I'm sure we missed the stroke of genius there, Gary.
Yeah, but, you're right. Not much.
But it's kind of funny because sometimes people think that logic is just studying informal fallacies, and we'll talk about what that is. And they see that as like these sort of secret weapons, like infinity stones that are going to give me power over all my enemies online. And that's a mistake, right? That's definitely not the way you want to approach it. So I figure that it's probably best to just kind of start with just a very basic introduction to what logic is and the study of logic. And then we can talk about fallacies because just studying fallacies of a certain sort, especially informal fallacies, it could actually be a little bit dangerous. I say a little education can sometimes be a dangerous thing. I think this is true in logic too. So yeah, real quick, logic, as I said, is kind of the study of the structure of thought. It helps us to think in clear, consistent channels. And traditionally, we see thought as having kind of three essential components, right? We have acts of apprehension, acts of judgment, and acts of reasoning. So what are these? Okay, apprehension is when we really kind of grasp the intelligible content of something, of being, we would say, kind of if we want to go metaphysically or ontologically. But what does apprehension do? It produces concepts. That's what it does. It produces concepts which are expressed logically as terms, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute. So that's the first act of the mind, apprehension. Then we have judgment, and judgment is when we start to relate concepts together, famously such as like man and mortal or men and mortal. And judgments give us propositions, and we'll talk about that in a second. I know, probably boring stuff, but it's important to do the rudiments. And then the third act of the mind is reasoning, and that's when we start to relate two or more judgments together to produce a further judgment. And reasoning produces arguments, and we often express these as syllogisms. So from the three acts of the mind, apprehension, we get terms, judgment, we get propositions, and reasoning, we get syllogisms. And just a little bit about each of these. So terms answer to the question of what something is. What is it? And it's like the basic unit of meaning that has itself no structural parts. So terms reveal conceptual apprehension. And because of that, they're never true or false. Terms can never be true or false, or valid or invalid. Terms are only clear or unclear. And this is going to be important in argumentation because some fallacies deal with ambiguous terms. So terms can only be clear or unclear. And linguistically, terms are typically expressed in words or phrases, such as man. Okay. Propositions answer to the question of, is it? So there's kind of two structural parts to a proposition. We have the subject, and that's what we're talking about, and we have the predicate, and that's what we're saying about the subject, such as man is mortal. And because propositions are judgments, propositions themselves are never clear or unclear. They're only true or false for proposition. So it's either true or it's false that man is mortal. And then linguistically, these are expressed typically as declarative sentences. And then finally, we have arguments, and that tries to answer the question of why is it? And arguments have two structural parts as well. They have premises, which are the kind of assumed parts, and the conclusions, which follow on from the premises. And because arguments involve reasoning, arguments can never be clear or unclear, true or false. They can only be valid or invalid. And linguistically, we often see these in the form of paragraphs. So the famous example that's typically given would be, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So those are kind of like the fundamentals, I think, the basic need to know going into logic of what logic tries to study in the different acts of the mind.
Yeah, boy, that's such a great description, because you really do go through all the different components, and and all the problems of reasoning stem from one of those three areas, right? It's either in terms of ambiguous terms, invalid or untrue premises, or just something's wrong with the structure of the reasoning.
Yeah, and that's really important for exactly the reason that you've just highlighted. So fallacies, and we talk about fallacies, are arguments which appear to prove their conclusion, but in fact do not. So they often, or at least we could say, can appear to prove their conclusion. Some fallacies are so obvious that nobody falls for it, but they can appear to prove their conclusion, but they do not. And then we have formal fallacies and informal or material fallacies. Sometimes the term informal and material are used interchangeably. So to your point, formal fallacies are mistakes in reasoning. So that's related to that third act of the mind. And these are a little bit more cut and dry, right? So they're kind of a little bit more formal because they have to do with the structure of the argument. So once you kind of study the laws of logic and types of different syllogisms, they're a lot easier to detect. But we can get into that after the break because I hear the music.
Yeah, absolutely. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of the Pat Flynn Show, chroniclesofstrength.com. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about 7 fallacies you need to know when debating online. Stay tuned, folks.
Hi, this is Jesse Romero from the Terry and Jesse Show, also from Jesus 911. Let's face it, we all need to use the internet, but we need screen accountability. Why? Pornography is a huge problem, especially on the internet. And every time we tap into the internet, we get bombarded with images and temptations that degrade our humanity. So we need Covenant Eyes to block these pornographic sites and advertisements from infiltrating our lives. Covenant Eyes helps us take custody of our eyes and custody of our intellect. So I recommend you go to covenanteyes.com and type in the promo code VMPR to support the network. Protect yourself and your family from the imminent threats on the internet. www.covenanteyes.com, code VMPR, live porn free. Thank you for listening to Virgin's Most Powerful Radio. Thank you. God bless you. Keep the faith.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Master Apologist Pat Flynn and talking about 7 fallacies that you need to know before you debate online. And Pat gave a great summary of logic in general. And Pat, you just started talking about formal fallacies, and maybe we should just put a bow on that, and then let's talk about those 7 fallacies.
Sure thing. Yeah. So formal fallacies, go study them. Really important. Deals with the third act of the mind. Things like, denying the antecedent, stuff like that. But it's the material fallacies that are most fun. These are the ones that everyone likes to study, that gives you a sense of superpowers and all that over your opponents. But like I said, you have to be careful because material fallacies deal with the matter or the content or the meaning of an argument. And they're more subtle and sometimes more difficult to both detect and apply, or to appropriately accuse somebody of actually committing a material fallacy. One quick example of this, of where it isn't always so cut and dry with material fallacies where it is with formal fallacies, would be the fallacy of composition, which we hear a lot, which actually factors in sometimes as arguments against the existence of God. And it has to deal with parts to whole reasoning, where a classic example of this would be because all the parts of something are light, say like an elephant, therefore the elephant is light. And most people can realize right away, no, there's something wrong with that, right? The elephant is quite heavy, right? This would be the fallacy of composition. But, however, not all parts to whole reasoning is a fallacy of composition. And what's relevant is the category on hand, the type of thing we're talking about, the property or the qualitative category. So while it might be true that that type of inference is invalid when we're talking about something like weight, what about when we're talking about something like color, for example? So we can think of an example of sort of red bricks, where every brick in a wall is red. Well, yeah, the whole wall is red, right? So that would be an example where the parts to whole reasoning would seem to work. So this is just the reason I am giving this example is this is to highlight where a little education can be a dangerous thing. And like people sometimes learn the name of a fallacy and then they'll see like parts to whole reasoning and they'll immediately say fallacy of composition, but you have to think more carefully about this. So just keep that in mind as we kind of work our way through here.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So we're going to talk about fallacies people need to know before they go online and debate. I'm just curious, how did you come up with the 7 fallacies?
My Facebook feed.
Okay. Well, that's a reliable source. So there you go.
It's an infinite wellspring. It's the geyser that never stops giving of fallacies, Gary. And we all have to. When it comes to online debates, we say we all have to pick our battles. But unfortunately, a lot of people just think that means you don't pick any battles. You got to pick some battles, right? Like we got to get out there. We got to make arguments. For many different reasons. So it's important to have conversations, and we want to do everything we can to make them productive. But one exercise I like to do just to try and keep myself sharp, or people who are studying logic, is even if you're not going to wade into every debate, just look at some and see if you can pick out some fallacies, just for the sake of exercise, logical exercise. So that's what I did. I just picked out fallacies that I've been seeing pretty common lately on social media. And then I tried to give examples of these that are kind of from both sides of the political spectrum, just to demonstrate that no one political party or affiliation has a monopoly on fallacious thinking. So, it's something that everybody has to be on the lookout for. But yeah, these were entirely inspired by my Facebook feed.
I love it. Field research producing good fruit. That's great. Okay,
Right.
well, what's the first one people should know?
Sure, and all these are pretty common. And the first one's hasty generalization. So what is that? Hasty generalization it's specifically a fallacy of induction. And induction is typically reasoning from particulars to a universal. So inductive reasoning can only give us probabilities. That's an aspect of logic we skipped over, but that's the type of fallacy it is. And hasty generalization occurs when a person takes an inference, when a person infers a general principle from specific examples without adequate representation, without enough number or diversity when is relevant. So what would be some examples of this? Two from kind of contemporary political debates. One is that just because this protester is a rioter and that protester is a rioter, it doesn't follow that all protesters are rioters, for example. We've seen that one a lot. Statistically, we know that's not the case. But another example would be just because this cop was a brutalizer and that cop was a brutalizer, it doesn't follow that all cops are brutalizers or racists, or fill it in, whatever you want. Those would be two examples of a hasty generalization. And it's a very common fallacy. You see it all the time. And this is why statistics matter, right? This is why data matters. And it's not good enough, typically, especially in important conversations that might affect policy, to just go by anecdotes or feelings. We have to know the relevant statistics to see if these generalizations are justifiable.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, it's difficult always to get a good feeling for, well, do we have an adequate sample to give a generalization that is more or less accurate, because you can't really draw the line, can you, as to, at this percentage, then we know for a fact that this necessarily follows.
That's true. It's sometimes difficult, but when you actually look at statistics in a lot of cases, you'll see, well, we're definitely not there, right? So it's kind of like the beard. Like, when does the beard come in exactly? When does the ferret on Pat Flynn's face finally become a beard? It's hard to say, but we know for certain it's definitely not there right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing with hasty generalization is it's so easy to do, because there's the instinct to shoot from the hip and just grab facts, put them together real quick, and lob them out there. And of course, that can come back to bite you.
Yeah. And it's one of those things we could argue, okay, is it a problem and part of it depends on the argument. Like, if you're saying all people, right, or all of this category, then we only need one counterexample, right?
Yeah, right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Then it's right. So that's important. That's kind of the way that I phrased it. Unfortunately, that's the way a lot of this political rhetoric goes. Now, we know they probably don't seriously mean that. It's exaggerated rhetoric. But if they did mean that, then this is clearly a hasty generalization, because we've got that's when one example would matter, because it just counts against the hypothesis that it's all of a certain category.
Yeah, so the bigger the claim, the easier it is to knock it down, in a sense, because you only need that one counterexample to destroy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, hasty generalization, folks. Put that on your list. That's number one.
That's your first infinity stone. There you go.
There you go. All right, what's second on the list?
Okay, this one is called, it goes under different terms, but I like the term whataboutism, and this would fall under a fallacy of diversion. And it gets its name from people who say, well, what about this or what about that? And they're trying to divert from an argument. So whataboutism seeks to distract from the point currently being argued rather than addressing the argument itself. So the diversion may, in fact, point out something very important or some other very important issue, but it's irrelevant to the argument at hand, and so it can't stand as a refutation thereof. And I think there's two very good politically charged examples of this. Everyone loves politically charged examples. So on the pro-life side, sometimes you'll hear the whataboutism where somebody says, oh, you care about unborn babies so much, then what about all those children in need of adoption? right? That's and hey, I care very much about children in need of adoption. I think that's a really important issue. But this is the one we're focusing on now, right? So that's why it's a fallacy of diversion, is trying to take away from the argument itself. Very much agree that children in need of adoption are important. Of course they matter. Then the other one that we hear a lot is the sort of Black Lives Matter. And then people will kind of retort to that, well, all lives matter, or this life matter, or that, which again, I hope everybody would affirm both of those propositions, right? That Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, unborn lives matter. But if somebody's trying to draw attention to a specific issue and they've given an argument for why this is an issue, then it becomes a fallacy of diversion to engage in this whataboutism. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the temptation to divert people's attention is usually when they give examples that are really, what do I want to say, important and require some attention. But the problem is it's just not the question at hand. So it becomes even more of an attraction to get off track.
Yeah, it's really an issue of logical justice in some ways, paying due justice to the argument, right? So you can also see whataboutism as appeals to hypocrisy sometimes, right? So somebody says, well, hey, I think you're a liar because of X, Y, and Z. And then somebody will respond, well, you're a liar too, kind of a tu quo quo fallacy in some respects. And it's important because that sort of, well, you're a liar too response might be true. might very well be true. But even liars and hypocrites can be right. So we need to address the actual argument, not just attack the person. And some of these fallacies kind of blend and converge, right? They're diversion fallacies or kind of ad hominem fallacies. So sometimes you get what I call these fallacy smoothies, these fallacy blends. This is a lot packed in, right?
That's good. I got to steal that. That's a great term. Yeah, so how do you distinguish from a legitimate counterexample from a divergent, attempt to change the subject?
Yeah, I think it depends entirely on the context. So if somebody's making a claim, for example, that all police engage in brutality, then that's where you could say, well, what about this pool of statistics here? Because you're not diverting from the argument. You're challenging one of the particular claims that is relevant to the argument itself. So you just have to kind of be patient and parse that out.
Yeah. So you just make sure it's on subject, that it naturally follows from it. But be careful if it's just a related subject, or that maybe tangentially related subject, because you could get pulled off the scent, so to speak.
And that's a good point, because just because you see the words "what about" doesn't mean you're committing the whataboutism fallacies. That's again why these are sometimes a little bit more subtle, and you have to think about these things. They're not just kind of like blanket cases.
Yeah, very good. All right, so we have hasty generalization. We have whataboutism, which is kind of a fallacy smoothie, I guess you could say.
In many ways, yes.
Yeah. So what's the third one?
Yeah, the third one is argument from silence. And this would be another fallacy of induction, right? And this is where somebody attempts to draw a conclusion from the absence of statements or reasons or evidence given. So I hear the music, so that's probably a good place. We'll just leave it as
we'll get back. There will be a momentary period of silence, and then we'll get back to this. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics with Pat Flynn. We will be right back, folks. Stay tuned.
Help the Helpless, a Minnesota St. Paul nonprofit organization chaired by Father of Tear and volunteers, is humbly asking you for your kind support to help the poor and the handicapped children in India and Ecuador. Through financial support from the Help of the Helpless benefactors, the children are provided with clothing, food, education, shelter, and the teachings of the Catholic Church. The mission is to help children thrive and become self-sufficient young adults leading productive lives. We also provide aid to poor families in Ecuador with food baskets, medicines, medical assistance, and help with funeral needs for the deceased. The work in India is done by Father Antonio's organization, St. Mary's. In Ecuador, the work is being done by the Servant Sisters of the Home of Mother. You can call us at 877-762-8857. To learn more, please visit our website, www.helpthehelpless.org. God bless you.
Healthcare news today seems to be coming from everywhere and everyone. It's confusing at least and untrustworthy at the worst. Dr. Aceta is a faithful Catholic in the Kern County community. He is trustworthy, well-researched, and will only give expert opinion on matters in his own specialty. Catholic teaching at its entirety is of utmost importance to Dr. Aceta. Give Dr. Aceta a call for your obstetrics and gynecological needs at 661-695-6617.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. We are chatting with our good friend Pat Flynn of chroniclesofstrength.com. And we're looking at 7 fallacies that you need to know before you engage in online debating. And we already covered hasty generalization, whataboutism. And Pat, you just introduced the third one, which is the argument from silence, which essentially argues that since there's an absence of evidence, that proves that something didn't exist or something to that effect.
Right, absent, and you sometimes hear this in certain objections to claims made from history, but I'll kind of bring it up to a more modern context. But yes, it's people making inferences or drawing conclusions from the absence of statements, reasons, evidence, etc. And the reason this is a fallacy is because people can be silent for many reasons. Maybe they got distracted, or maybe they want a little privacy, or maybe they feel that their views on something are too complex to articulate in 140 characters on Twitter adequately, right? Or maybe they're not silent on another area of their life, but they're just silent on this area of their life. So that's why you really cannot draw any type of conclusion from silence. And this is why arguments from silence are notoriously weak. Famous example that we're kind of hearing nowadays is like, hey, if you don't have, your stance out there on X, Y, or Z issue on your Facebook wall, for example, it must be because you implicitly support it or endorse it, right? So if you're not against communism, you must be a communist, right? If you're not against racism, you must be a racist. If you're not against abortion, you must be an abortionist. And notice the language I'm using is sometimes you commonly hear this, but what they really mean is if you don't publicly disavow this on X, Y, or Z platform, it's because you're secretly that thing yourself. And this is obviously ridiculous for the reasons that I've given, but it's become odd to see how increasingly common this fallacy has become, and it's kind of tied into appeals to force or fear or intimidation too. So we've got kind of an interesting fallacy smoothie going on yet again.
Yeah. I was going to say, that could be a way to bully people, into doing things that they maybe just for whatever reason don't feel comfortable doing.
It's certainly being used to bully people, I think, in a modern context, which is why I say it's kind of a blend, right? So it's using an argument from silence to try and, it's kind of like the appeal to the stick fallacy, right? Of trying to intimidate or appeal to fear or force. So it's one of those instances where I think it's both. I think another smoothie, another blend going on.
Yeah, and of course, silence has no value either way. Silence is silence. It doesn't mean anything unless it's a very tightly circumscribed circumstance where someone needs, has no choice but to stipulate something. Otherwise, it would be a rejection. You know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And those are fairly rare. You have to do a lot of legwork to get that kind of circumstance where silence would actually count as evidence against something.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So you can do it. Like if you squeeze the circumstances enough, you might be able to find an instance where say, okay, this is an instance where I would really, really, really have good reason to expect that this person would have said something and they don't. Again, not an airtight inference, but it could be made. But those, like you said, it's exceptionally rare to find those cases.
Yeah, very good. So that's number 3. What's number 4 on our list?
Well, we've hinted at it. It's appeals to force or fear. Okay. And an appeal to force or fear, again, it's another fallacy of diversion, right? So we're diverting from the argument. And this is just you're just appealing to straight emotion rather than reason. That's why it's a fallacy. So not much else really needs to be said about it, except that it's just extremely common and very pernicious, right? So you kind of bypass reason altogether, and you're just appealing to base emotion by trying to intimidate somebody or scare somebody.
Yeah, Pat, I have to say, over my lifetime, the appeals to force or appeals to fear were very rare, but it seems like it's growing more and more. Like this is becoming a more and more, like you said, more pernicious fallacy than ever.
Yeah, and let's tie it into the argument from silence. Somebody say, hey, anybody who hasn't said anything on this issue or spoken out on issue X, Y, or Z on Facebook. Well, we're taking notice and we're going to hold you accountable. Very spooky, like Stalinist you're going to be brought before the Stalinist apparatchik or something like that. It's freaky. So yeah, it is freaky. This is not reasonable behavior. This is not how sane people should be acting, and it's destroying public discourse. And we know that discourse is important because if you don't have that sort of mediating instrument of argument and conversation, you kind of have two extremes. You either have just total indifference or you have violence, right? Yeah. But eventually the indifference is going to go away and you're just going to have violence. So we better start trying to think clearly and start trying to have conversations with people and be very much on the alert for these appeals to force and fear and call them out when we hear them.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, for me, whenever I see it being used, I think that this is really a confession of weakness, that they can't compel people by reason or evidence, so they have to resort to just scaring them, intimidating them into buckling because the arguments don't work.
Yeah, it's true. Hey, parents can be guilty of this too. Sometimes the kids will have a good challenge and parents will be like, because I said so, or you're going to be punished, right? So I try, even as a parent, to make sure that I'm always able to give my kids good reasons for why they're wrong or why they're going to be punished, rather than just appealing to my size or stature, right?
That's true. But, the instinct of survivability is also very important too. They have to learn to survive in whatever circumstance they're in, especially when their parents are angry.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, here's another thing: is kids have a moral obligation to respect and honor their parents. We don't have a moral obligation to bow down to public intimidation on social media. So there is a relevant difference there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, good point. Okay, so fallacy 5.
Yeah, shifting the burden of proof. And now this is interesting because who actually has the burden of proof in any given situation is a matter of great philosophical and historical debate. But generally, if you agree with the sentiment that it's more heinous to hang an innocent person than allow some guilty people to go free or unpunished, then one should generally operate under the assumption that we typically do in America, that you're innocent until proven guilty, for example. Therefore, so if somebody has a serious moral charge, made against them, that person is not obligated to prove his or her innocence, right? So if somebody says, "Prove to me you're not an idiot," that isn't your burden of proof. For example, prove to me you're not a donkey. No, you're the one making the charge. You have to prove to everyone else why I'm the idiot. So it's the person who's making the accusation, especially if it's a moral accusation, who has the obligation to demonstrate the person's guilt. So shifting the burden of proof is another fallacy of procedure. And we see it again. These all are kind of blending into the same thing: appeals to force, arguments from silence. Okay, you were silent. Now you need to prove to me why you're not X, Y, or Z, right?
Yeah, and especially in Catholicism, there should always be a presumption of charity on the part of, if someone says something they're objecting to, and you believe they're wrong, you should always have this presumption that, well, maybe they're misunderstanding, maybe I don't understand them clearly. There's some sort of problem with communication. Give them deference. And, without saying, you're a heretic or, depart from me, you accursed, because.
Yeah. And, I just want to echo those sentiments because I think it's something that's lost on society greatly today and I think this just comes down to greater moral confusion is that, people forget that all persons as being made in the image and likeness of God are of infinite value and dignity and deserving of at least a baseline modicum of respect that could never in principle be violated. So not all ideas deserve respect. That's certainly true. And some ideas deserve to be battled to their absolute destruction. But all persons deserve a baseline level of respect that comes out of their inherent dignity. And there's so much going on now, people just wanting to destroy and ruin persons. Really, it seems like it comes from the vice of envy in many respects and like true hatred. And that's vicious behavior. That's not good. That's vicious, sinful behavior. We don't want that. We should always will the good of a person, no matter how morally egregious they've been. Like even Hitler, right? There's even some things we wouldn't do to Hitler because he's still a human person, right? Doesn't mean he's not deserving of punishment. Doesn't mean that he isn't really guilty. He is, but he's still a human person. And it seems like people just have completely forgotten this fundamental moral axiom in conversation today, and it's kind of sad and certainly alarming.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we got two more. Let's go to number 6. What's the fallacy?
Squeeze them in. The Motte-and-Bailey Fallacy. So the Motte-and-Bailey tactic, sometimes this is called the inverse strongman, is a rhetorical strategy of retreating to a less controversial claim when you're challenged on a more controversial claim, and thereby you're conflating the two. So this is a rhetorical technique that's often used to kind of wrench or emotionally manipulate somebody to really kind of ram through or Trojan horse through an otherwise very controversial political position. So 2 quick examples. So one example might be you retreat to the slogan that, well, don't you support the troops when you're trying to defend a controversial position on a certain war, for example. That would be you're trying to push through a position on a certain war that somebody might be claiming is immoral or unjustified, and you retreat to the less controversial position of saying, well, hold on, don't you support the troops? Come on, right?
Yeah, right.
Another one would be retreating your slogan, but don't you think that Black Lives Matter to defend a controversial political organization, Black Lives Matter, which I think many people should have issues with, many of their other policies. So this is, again, saying, well, maybe I have issues with this policy or that policy or thing, and then somebody will retreat to well, don't you think that Black Lives Matter? Well, of course I do, right? So this is the Motte-and-Bailey tactic, right, where people are trying to usually push through a more controversial position or claim, and then when they're challenged on that, they retreat to a less controversial one as a rhetorical, manipulative ploy to get the more controversial claim through.
Very good. And number 7 is?
Bulverism, our favorite one by C.S. Lewis. And this is another fallacy of diversion. And it's a form of genetic fallacy, really, where you're attempting to explain why a person is wrong without first demonstrating that a person is wrong. So just some cliche examples, you only believe in God because you're afraid of death, for example. And the funny thing is that might be true. Maybe that's the only reason somebody believes in God. Now, I think there's many better reasons than that, but maybe that's it. But that doesn't show that their belief is false, right? So just by explaining the psychological cause behind a belief doesn't show whether or not that belief is true or false. So that's bulverism. Mm-hmm.
Very good. And you're absolutely right. These are rife out there in the social media, and people do well to know these 7 fallacies. Real quick: hasty generalization, whataboutism, argument from silence, appeal to force or fear, shifting the burden of proof, Motte-and-Bailey tactics, and bulverism. And man, I can't believe our time has flown. Where can people go to get your podcast and all the other great stuff that you produce?
The Pat Flynn Show on iTunes and chroniclesofstrength.com. Thank you, Gary. Always a joy.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. And great advice. Studying, folks. To be forearmed is to be ready for anything that comes at you. So thank you so much for listening to the program. But never fear, you will soon be here with this Terry and Jesse show. Thank you so much for listening in. And God willing, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about defending the faith and gun apologetics. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.